Cancer symptoms are not always what you think, and that is what makes them so dangerous. Hey, Dr. Amy here, and as a cancer researcher and cancer survivor, I know how terrifying it is when something doesn't feel right. But here's the truth. Cancer's early symptoms, they're sneaky. They fooled even me, and I don't want you to make the same mistake too. So whether you've just started noticing strange changes, or you're waiting on test results, or maybe you're well into your treatment, you need to know this. These are the symptoms that nobody talks about and every cancer survivor needs to know about. My cancer symptoms didn't look like cancer at all. They looked like life. At the time, I was a researcher and a clinician. I was someone who thought they knew what cancer looked like. I had studied it, I had taught it, I had helped others through it thousands of times. And I knew the textbook warnings, the pains, the lumps, the unexplained bleeding, the sudden weight loss. What I wasn't expecting was this. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, one of the most difficult cancers to detect. The symptoms are vague and inconsistent and easily dismissed. Things like bloating or digestive changes or even fatigue. They don't even sound dangerous, but they can be. And ovarian cancer doesn't have a reliable screening method, so you simply rely on your symptoms to detect it. It can't be caught through pap smears or mammograms. This means that awareness of these symptoms that I'm about to share is your most powerful tool in saving your life. Knowing what to look for could quite literally save your life. It started quietly. Little small shifts that seemed different, but not big enough to really worry about. The first was heartburn. Not the occasional kind that you get after a big meal, but constant heartburn. Every day, every night, it didn't matter what I ate. That burning, that fullness was always there. I told myself that it was just stress or too much coffee, or maybe working too late at night. I kept antacids in my work bag and just moved on. Now, a lot of people have said to me that heartburn is not a symptom of ovarian cancer, and that I'm just scaring anyone who has heartburn into thinking they might have ovarian cancer. But that's not true. After sharing my story for the past 9 years, I've had a tremendous number of people tell me that they had the same symptoms. But then came the bloating. At first, it was like pretty mild, just a feeling of fullness, kind of like I'd eaten too much. But then over time, it became more pronounced and I was uncomfortable. My clothing felt tight and stretched. Still, I brushed it off because women get bloated sometimes. Hormones or maybe a sensitivity to food. But the last symptom was harder to ignore. It wasn't physical. It was this uneasy and persistent anxiety. Not about work or about relationships, but about my health. It was a deep instinct, kind of an internal alarm. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it logically, but I couldn't silence it either. That feeling, that intuition is what finally pushed me to go to my doctor. Even then, I felt a little silly about bringing it up. I mean, heartburn, bloating, anxiety. None of this sounded like it was even cancer. But my doctor listened carefully and suggested we do an ultrasound just to rule things out. I'll never forget the silence in that room while the technician was doing the scan. That's really the first time I knew that this wasn't something simple. This was something serious. The ultrasound showed a mass on my ovary. My doctor ordered a CA-125 blood test, like most ovarian cancer survivors are familiar with. This is a blood test that can measure a protein that may be elevated if you have ovarian cancer. When the results came back, my levels were high, astronomically high. That's when everything shifted. The CT scan was next. Now, I had been around thousands of scans and reviewed them in the span of my career, but nothing prepares you for doing this yourself. Seeing your own name on the screen with your own scan. It was that moment that I heard the words, "You have cancer." I knew what it meant for me, ovarian cancer, even before it was said out loud. Within days, I was scheduled for surgery. When I woke up, I was surrounded by machines and quiet voices. My surgeon told me it was stage 3 cancer. It was advanced, but the surgery was successful. Now, ovarian cancer is often called the silent killer, But I personally have never liked that term. It isn't silent, it whispers. The problem is that those whispers sound like normal life. Heartburn, bloating, fatigue, subtle abdominal discomfort. They're easy to explain away, especially for women who are just trying to push through. Most women have symptoms for months before they're diagnosed. But the earlier it's found, the better your outcomes. But the signs, they're so vague that they're often missed. After surgery, I started chemo. Now, I had studied the side effects of chemo for years, but living through them was a very different experience. The exhaustion was all-consuming. I was so tired. It wasn't even tiredness. It was like this heavy, wet blanket on my body. My body's energy had been erased. That is exactly when I started to see cancer recovery really differently. Healing after cancer is not about rest alone. It's about rebuilding through targeted nutrition, strategic movement, and transformative mindset. This experience reshaped my entire approach to cancer survivorship. And this is what later inspired what is now the Cancer Freedom Program. I began helping other cancer survivors to rebuild their energy and reclaim their lives, not just to survive after cancer, but to thrive, to truly live again. I often think about one woman who works with me inside the Cancer Freedom Program. She's a breast cancer survivor, and her name is also Amy. She came to me saying, when I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick. I felt really well. But now after my treatment, I feel terrible. But what led to her diagnosis was that subtle feeling of unease. That's what pushed her for more testing. Her story reinforces what we all know deep down to be true. Your intuition, it matters. For me, the symptoms that saved my life were the ones I almost completely ignored. Heartburn, bloating, and this uneasy feeling. They didn't fit that typical picture of cancer, but they were the beginning of my diagnosis and ultimately my recovery. Now, if you're experiencing something similar, do not panic. Listen to your body and just take the very next step forward. Ask for an ultrasound. They're pretty easy to get and pretty inexpensive. Ask for a CA-125 blood draw. Push to get answers. When I heard the word stage 3 ovarian cancer, I thought my life was over. But here I am almost 9 years later, stronger, healthier, more alive than ever before. That's not luck. That's what happens when you listen to your body carefully and you dedicate yourself to recovery and remission. Your body always tells the truth, even when it whispers. The question just becomes whether you're able to listen. Now, my symptoms, they didn't look like cancer, but they were. They taught me to trust my intuition and take action, even when it didn't 100% make sense. Okay, but now that you know what symptoms to look for, the next step is to prevent cancer or a recurrence. That's exactly why I'm linking up this next video for you here. Click the link here and I'll see you in the next video.